right here on your screen. We do want to warn our viewers, this still is graphic.
As the world debates the military response, 19 days since the worst terror attack in Israeli history.
You look at October 7th, it was a massive terrorist attack. Over 1,200 people were murdered that day.
The Islamist goal in the United States is to take over the country, to have a green flag over the White House and the Capitol.
Hamas is the Muslim Brotherhood in Israel, in Palestine. That is Hamas. Where you literally had death squads going house to house and killing every person in there, killing elderly people, killing women, killing children, killing infants, because they were Jewish. It was quite literally Nazi tactics for Nazi purposes.
It's important to draw a distinction between Islam, a religion 14 centuries old, and Islamism, a political movement a century old. Islam is very diverse. It includes the most radical, violent elements and pacifist, open elements. It is spread around the world. Islamism originates in the totalitarian movements in Europe, particularly fascism in Italy, but also communism in the Soviet Union. And these new kinds of governments a century ago impressed some Muslims into thinking, oh, Islam can be a version of that. And that's what it is. It's an ism, a totalitarian ism, along the lines of communism and fascism. Stalin, Hitler, they were very influential. Probably Stalin is the most influential figure in the formation of these Islamist organizations. The kind of Comintern and external organizations that the Soviet Union founded were a model for the Islamists. And as I oppose fascism and communism, I oppose Islamism.
So the Muslim Brotherhood is a global jihadist organization. It was founded in Egypt in 1928 with the objective of creating a caliphate that runs under Sharia law and using violent jihad to topple any government that opposes the Islamic caliphate. Many of the first victims of the Muslim Brotherhood were other Muslims. If a Muslim in Egypt did not support enforced Sharia law through violent jihad, they would murder their fellow Muslims.
And they founded organizations, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Jamaat-e-Islami, that endure to this day and influence many other organizations, and at this point have a global reach, as secretive, as deceptive, as violent, and they've had an enduring impact. Islamist organizations in the United States date back to the 1960s when they were small and not very important. They were basically funded from the outside, in particular by foreign governments. Since then, American Muslims, Muslims living in the United States, have acquired the means, the ambition to fund these organizations themselves.
So these lawful extremists, these non-violent extremists, seek not to impose Islamism through jihad, through the short, sharp explosion of a bomb, but through the long-term goal of subverting and manipulating democratic institutions. The origin of Islamism in America is often credited to the Muslim Brotherhood and the exiles from the Middle East affiliated with the Brotherhood who arrived in the US in the 1960s, where they established community groups, student organizations, and mosques that grew into some of the most impressive and dangerous lawful Islamist groups in the country today. So yes, the Brotherhood set up charities, it set up community groups, it set up prison reform campaign organizations, it set up women's shelters, it set up health clinics, everything you can imagine. Other Islamist groups did the same, but the Brotherhood was particularly good at it. And they had actually outlined it, this approach, in a series of documents.
The very first Islamist organization was founded in 1962 at the University of Illinois. The Muslim Student Association and other groups have grown over the decades and have become quite powerful, legitimate organizations in the university setting. What's called civilizational jihad, I would prefer to call lawful Islamism. It's working within the system. It's not breaking the law. It's not engaged in smuggling, not engaged in violence, not engaged in any kind of criminal activity, but working within the system, within the educational institutions, the philanthropic, the legal, the political, and working up through the system. Islamism is a bit difficult to discern, in part because it is connected to religion, and we in the United States pay great respect to religions and defer to religions. So where the religion ends and the political movement starts is a gray, difficult line to find. It's also a new phenomenon, whereas, say, communism goes back in the United States to the 1920s, Islamism really only became a national topic in the aftermath of 9/11. So it's alien, it's fairly new, it's connected to religion. It's a difficult topic.
It is through all manner of infiltration and exploitation of democratic groups. One thing that groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, as it's otherwise known, has been particularly keen on doing over the last few years, along with about 6 other important Islamist groups with origins in the Muslim Brotherhood.
I researched the situation inside Palestine and outside. I'm in support of the Hamas movement.
Has been establishing powerful networks of candidate training organizations, donor clubs and PACs, to try and shape American politics.
There is a fundamental divide between the violent and the nonviolent. In some cases, the violent can help, because then the nonviolent representatives can say, you better listen to us or there'll be more violence. That does work sometimes, but broadly speaking, they're independent. So they would prefer, in general, not to have violence, but to work quietly through the system and emerge as powerful figures with money, with political power, with influence over the public debate.
Currently, Hamas, a designated terrorist organization, enjoys support from a wide number of US registered 501c nonprofit charities. These charities are openly coordinate with foreign designated terrorist organizations in places like the Gaza Strip. Despite this fact, not a single one has been prosecuted. Since 2008, there have not been domestic prosecutions of Hamas operations in the United States. And as we know from our conversations with policymakers and people in the intelligence community, this is deliberate. The federal government regards Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood as strategic assets in the fight against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So they look the other way. Infrastructure, as outlined in that infamous 1990s memorandum, are very much part of an Islamist effort to build infrastructure in the United States. And with infrastructure comes the opportunity for manipulation and exploitation of the nonprofit sector, as well as the possible receipt of public funds. The tactics of Islamist groups since the 1920s, of the founding of the Brotherhood, has long relied on the establishment of social and charitable organizations. Indeed, today, groups like Hamas using charitable and social networks, but that tactic also extends to the West. Charity has been completely key, and charitable institutions have been completely key to the rise not just of Islamism in the West, but to terror groups in the East. And public funding for these humanitarian aid charities has been obscene.
And we don't know how much of that money, whether it's coming from Qatar, whether it's coming from Iran, whether it's coming from China, or whether it's coming from American leftists like George Soros and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who many of them are also among the largest donors to the Democrat Party.
The amount of money that local government gives these charities is considerable. It doesn't include the vast amounts of corporate foundation money, many tens and tens of millions more. It doesn't include European governments, EU, the UN, and other world government bodies. This is an enormous multi-billion-dollar industry. Their most successful product was aid charities. Aid charities like Islamic Relief, Human Appeal, Baitul Mal, or defunct groups like the Holy Land Foundation. These organizations were set up to support Islamist movements abroad. And indeed, there is credible evidence showing that several were set up to benefit groups like Hamas, a designated terrorist organization. These charities may operate lawfully, file their tax returns, work within reputable international aid infrastructure, but they are behind the scenes subsidizing terror groups in the East, using that same charitable infrastructure to hide their activities. So the lawful is not entirely lawful when it comes to the Brotherhood and to other Islamist movements as well.
The Council on American Islamic Relations was founded in 1994. The documents show that it was founded as an extension of Hamas, the now Gazan-based Islamist jihadi organization. The CARE's founders and staff, board, have denied this and have presented the organization as American, as benign, legal.
Well, we don't know, but I think the Department of Justice and the FBI should be actively investigating it. There's every reason to believe there's still money that is flowing to the Muslim Brotherhood, that is flowing to Hamas and Hezbollah and to jihadists, because we know that there are radicals here in the United States that support their terrorist ends.
The amounts are staggering. $164 million of USAID money went to Islamist organizations. 122 million of that went to groups we know have aligned with Hamas. This is an enormous problem. It's not just about the money. These groups would survive without the money. They're wealthy organizations because they have a wealthy Muslim middle class donor base to fall back on. Money helps displace moderate Muslim alternatives. Money elevates extremists. This is the key reason that I focus so much on taxpayer funding of Islamist organizations and charities, and the absolute reason that we should try and stop every single cent. It's not just about the money, it's about the legitimacy. Taxpayer funds and partnerships legitimize Islamist charities.
Oklahoma is heading to federal prison for aiding terrorism. That man, along with 4 co-defendants, convicted of funneling millions of dollars to the Palestinian militant group Hamas.
For years, the Richardson-based charity has been under suspicion, accused of funding terrorists.
That said, at times the non-violent veers into the violent, and one of the lessons after 9/11 that federal law enforcement learned was how much overlap there was between Brotherhood networks and certain Al-Qaeda networks. So for all the claims of non-violence, there was overlap, overlap with jihad.
If you look at the anti-Semitic protests on college campuses all over the country, those were not organic. They didn't just spring up out of nowhere. They were clearly funded. I'm not the only person who noticed that many of the tents matched. I'm not the only person who noticed that many of the radicals who were harassing and threatening other students were wearing matching vests. And there clearly was money flowing to those protests. These riots are Marxist, they're jihadist, and in many ways they're anarchists. And we've seen at a lot of campuses, in particular Jewish students being threatened. At MIT, the Jewish students said they were afraid to go to campus because they feared for their safety. They feared they would be physically injured or killed. I'm here to say right now that if you are a foreigner coming from a country abroad and you are here threatening violence, carrying out riots, you should be deported. And every person who engaged in an act of violence, harassed or threatened other students, they should be arrested, they should be prosecuted, they should be expelled, and if they're foreigners, they should be deported. And that has always been one of the objectives of the Muslim Brotherhood, to tear down America, because they want to see America, just like every other country, under Sharia law, under an Islamic caliphate, and they're willing to engage in acts of violence to try to produce that.
Islamism need not be violent. Indeed, I would argue that in the West, it is working through the institutions of civil society, education, the courts, the political process, philanthropy, that's more effective than violence. But violence is inherent to Islamist ideology. Islamist organizations have done a fine job of presenting themselves as civil society institutions, interested in welfare and legal protection and so forth. This goes back to a distinction that many of them make between the public face, which is quite benign and acceptable and legal, and the private face, which is anything but acceptable and benign and legal. The internal ones are secret police-like, and this duality in the organizations has given them an ability to present themselves, for example, in the West, as acceptable organizations. The trials that have taken place of Islamist organizations in the United States have repeatedly shown this distinction.
We're seeing that now in places like Michigan, with towns such as Dearborn and Hamtramck. We see it even in small towns in Virginia, where Islamists take control of a school board or become a local mayor in Pennsylvania. I'm concerned that policy is changing with regards to religious organizations being able to express opinions on politics despite being public charities. All of these changes, I think, will make it easier for hostile, radical ideologies to impose their will on American society, to push candidates, Islamist candidates, into political position, to cajole and bribe non-Muslim politicians to advance Islamist causes, and to create a series of Islamist-controlled local towns and counties across the country.
Clearly, Zahran Mamdani, at this point, is a candidate for mayor of New York City, and others are rising. So we now have Islamist candidates or politicians. They're just a few. They're a minor voice, but they're growing. So they would prefer, in general, not to have violence, but to work quietly through the system and emerge as powerful figures with money, with political power, with influence over the public debate. And it's happening. It's happening in the United States, but it's far more advanced in Europe, in a country like the United Kingdom.
We're not going to see sudden change over a generation or two, the kind of change that France, Britain is experiencing right now.
The great defensive mechanism of the Islamists, starting in the UK and now all over the world, is a term that developed in the mid-1990s called Islamophobia.
The Brotherhood exists a little more tangibly in the UK than it does in the US, whereas there's no real evidence of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood still operating in the United States directly. In the UK, it does. In fact, when the Egyptian Brotherhood split into factions after 2013, some of its leadership went to Qatar, some went to Turkey, and some came to London. So the UK still has an active Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood. You know, the original Brotherhood is still there. The British government continues to fund Islamism. The lessons learned by the British 10 years ago under David Cameron, who understood the threat of non-violent extremism, have been lost. The new Labour government, and indeed towards the end of the old Conservative government, have re-embraced many of the extremists that I thought we'd convince the government to firmly reject. The key threat in Britain, the key threat is the Hamas networks. And Hamas operates very openly in the UK. It operates an accountancy firm out of East London. I've popped by a few times to try and learn a little about the people inside. But yes, it's an accountancy firm from which about 30, 40 different businesses and non-profits registered to Hamas operatives operate from this one address. And its reach is not just community groups and mosques, but accountancy firms and lobbying organizations, solicitor, attorney, lawyers organizations, and even an art gallery in central London. So now we have what I think has sometimes been referred to as Europe as the red, green, brown alliance. The growing involvement of both the right and the left with Islamist causes. My great fear for Europe is the toleration of Islamism and the extraordinary changes to local communities that have taken place, Islamist-led, is that this leads to violence between different sections of British society, between different sections of French society. We've seen a lot of warnings of that in the last year. We've seen the rise of quite hard far-right organizations in response. This is going nowhere good in Europe. I'm relieved to no longer be living in Britain. It's frightening, I think, where the direction of that country is going. So I don't think there is much America can learn from European governments. I do think there's quite a bit America can learn from European mistakes, from immigration mistakes, from public funding mistakes. I'm sad to say that America is not learning. The federal government is not learning. It continues to embrace the same extremists the Europeans have. I think the US should look to Europe as a harbinger for what can happen when this problem is left untreated and ignored. Yeah, so there are lessons to learn from Europe. The US government is not learning it. The lessons do not come from European government decisions, they come from European government failures.
Democracies are open, but they also need to protect themselves. As a famous American jurist, Robert Jackson, once put it, democracies are not suicide pacts. And this came up in particular in the 30s with fascism, Nazism, and the 50s with communism. And it came up 25 years ago in the aftermath of 9/11 with Islamism.
Once the siren starts wailing, Israelis have about 13 minutes to get into a shelter, because that's the amount of time it takes for an Iranian ballistic missile to reach this country.
Many Arab countries have designated the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. Egypt has, Saudi Arabia has, the UAE has, Bahrain has. Actually, just today, Kenya designated the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. During the first Trump administration, I tried very hard to get the administration to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. There was a vigorous argument, but we didn't succeed. And essentially, the deep state managed to kill it.
My main objection to designating the Brotherhood is that it will make it a lot harder to track. Pushing them underground, I think, would be a mistake and risk reinvigorating them. It also does little, because if the US government isn't willing to prosecute Hamas, which is already designated, then what good will designating the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood do? No, I'd rather track the extremists who move around openly and prosecute the terrorists. There is a clear set of priorities here, and I think additional legislation to deal with it is the wrong approach.
I think they should all be designated as terrorist organizations. Yes, they all have a violent element, and all of them are present in the United States.
What I've done with this bill is inverted it. It's a bottom-up bill instead. It directs the administration to identify and designate those branches of the Muslim Brotherhood that are terrorist organizations. Branches like Hamas, branches like Qassam, which is another branch that is clearly a terrorist organization, is engaged in multiple acts of violence. It directs the administration designate those branches and then designate the global Muslim Brotherhood because it materially supports those terrorist organizations. I think that is much harder to argue against because every step in that logic chain, I think, is irrefutable. There's no doubt that many of the branches are unequivocally terrorist organizations, and there's no doubt that the global organization is actively supporting those terrorist branches.
The Department for Homeland Security has considerable power, but not only is it not helping identify extremist threats and fight radicalization within Muslim communities, but DHS actively funds, as USAID and other agencies, DHS actively funds a lot of these extremist Islamist organizations.
You look at what happened during the Biden administration. The Biden administration relaxed sanctions and flowed over $100 billion into Iran, where the Ayatollah chants, "Death to America." And in a very real sense, the Biden administration flowing that money into Iran funded October 7th because the money going to Hamas to carry out that mass murder, much of it came directly from Iran.
Funding is not just about the amount of taxpayer dollars that benefits the Islamists. The funding problem is about the legitimacy that public partnership bestows. Ending government patronage of Islamist organizations, which hundreds of millions of dollars over the past few decades, is vital and has to be done.
When he came in 2017, I don't think President Trump realized what a deep and pervasive problem the deep state was. He understands fully the challenge from within of left-wing bureaucrats who oppose not only his administration, but oppose the principle of America first. They put left-wing ideology ahead of protecting this country. During the Obama administration, the Department of Homeland Security engaged in what they called a purge. And this is actually, purge is the word that was used by the Obama White House. The Obama White House, in writing, sent an email to DHS and said, purge your records of any reference to Muslim Brotherhood, to jihad, to radical Islamic terrorists. Search for those words, and if they're in your records, delete them. And over 800 files were modified or deleted because of the purge the Obama White House was directing. And when you are dealing with the threat of radical Islamic terrorism, the first step is clarity, understanding who it is that is trying to kill Americans. And the Obama administration, for ideological reasons, not only refused to acknowledge it, but affirmatively covered it up.
The law is not being enforced. Policymakers already have the tools they need to deal with much of the Islamist threat. They choose not to.
I've also introduced legislation called the Stop Funders Act. What the Stop Funders Act would do is it would add rioting to the list of predicate offenses under RICO. RICO is the racketeering law that is used most frequently to go after the mafia, to go after organized crime. And adding rioting would give prosecutors the ability to say, if you are funding riots, anti-Semitic riots on college campuses, Black Lives Matter or Antifa riots burning American cities, or open border riots in Los Angeles, if you're writing checks that is funding rioting, you'll be prosecuted, because the best way to cut this off is cut off the money.
There is freedom of speech. At the same time, freedom of speech can lead to incitement and can lead to violence and other forms of criminality. And so that freedom of speech and that freedom of association needs to be monitored and at times closed down. It has to be done carefully, it has to be done legally, but it needs to be done. I proposed these nearly 100 questions, but in no case have I seen that they've been implemented. They're expensive, they're time-consuming, they demand expertise, they're not easy. And neither the US federal government nor any other agency nor private organizations have really engaged in this. They don't have the awareness necessary that this is a problem, and so they don't do the job.
Most of the good things that have happened over the last few years have been through general government cuts or because of pro-Israel activity inadvertently leading to policies that that cause trouble for Islamist groups, but no concerted, deliberate effort to hamper, to impede, to fight the Islamist threat has been conceived or implemented in the US. And I think this has been a mistake. If you, one, understand the threat, research it, two, defund the threat using that research, understanding who shouldn't be getting any money or support, and three, prosecute it. The lawful is not entirely lawful when it comes to the Brotherhood and to other Islamist movements as well. But the long-term plan is not just through charity, it is through all manner of infiltration and exploitation of democratic groups. One thing that groups like the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, as it's otherwise known, has been particularly keen on doing over the last few years, along with about 6 other important Islamist groups with origins in the Muslim Brotherhood, has been establishing powerful networks of candidate training organizations, donor clubs and PACs, to try and shape American politics, to push candidates, Islamist candidates, into political positions.
So I believe President Trump will designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. I have had extensive conversations with the administration. I am hopeful it is moving forward. Now, I anticipate the deep state will fight back. They will resist. And in the first Trump term, the deep state prevailed. I don't think they're going to prevail this second term.
I think Muslim peoples are turning against Islamism, and for 2 main reasons. One is that they see the experience of countries that have been ruled by Islamists, and they don't like it. And also the Islamists themselves are at loggerheads and are fighting each other. So that discredits them. A number of Muslims have come to the West, the United States in particular, because they're fleeing Islamism, because they don't want it. And so what you have is a new phenomenon, which is ex-Muslims who are the most direct opponents of the Islamists, who know, and Islam in many cases know Islamism. They're former Islamists themselves.
Understanding it is the key to fighting it, and we can only do that with your help, with you, the watcher, your assistance. Policymakers are much easier to persuade to do the right thing when we have grassroots support, when we have the public support.
Speak out, use your voice. Use your voice on social media, use your voice in your community, write a letter to the editor, make a phone call your congressman, call your senator, call the White House. I'm trying to do everything I can to build that momentum, to shine a light, to lay out the facts, because I think the facts are compelling, but you adding your voice makes a real difference.